I'm not doing this for people like peers. I'm doing this for women around the world that need to see someone that looks like me, to feel less alone, and to understand that the way they look is beautiful. And the majority of my following is not plus size. It's very diverse. And so at the end of the day, we all have issues with our body, and I'm sure Piers does as well. And, I think we could go a long way with a little bit of respect and kindness, but unfortunately, that didn't happen in this case.
In the summer of 2018, plus-size model and body-positive advocate Tess Holliday was featured on the cover of an upcoming issue of Cosmopolitan magazine. Tess Holliday, who at this time was gaining a ton of popularity and attention for being one of the first plus-size models over a size 16, was plastered across the cover in a dark green one-piece bathing suit, blowing a kiss to the camera. In the bottom right corner of the issue it reads, "The supermodel roars. Tess Holliday wants the haters to kiss her ass." In an article for Cosmo that was released in promotion of the upcoming issue, Tess Holliday detailed her history of mental health issues, body image issues stemming from kids at school bullying and ridiculing her for her weight, a history of domestic violence that she witnessed among her parents, and she describes the cruel and invasive comments she receives about her weight from people on the internet. From being told that she was too fat to wear certain clothes to being told to cover up because no one wants to see her fat body. Out of frustration, she created the hashtag #FYourBeautyStandards campaign. One of the first posts that used the hashtag featured 4 photos of Tess Holliday wearing clothes she was told fat women can't wear. Despite promoting body positivity and body inclusivity in her online presence, Tess reveals that she did not always love her body. Ranging through a size 16 to 18 for most of her life, she wasn't confident in her appearance until after she had had her first son. "I'm at the heaviest I've ever been in my life now, and it took me being the heaviest to finally love myself." While this cover was meant to challenge beauty standards and represent women with different body types, and many people were vocal in their support of the cover and expressed how it made them feel seen or how it was nice to see a model who wasn't a size 2, other people saw this magazine cover not as inspiration or good representation, but as a detriment to society. Instead of praise, there were questions. What was the agenda here? Was Cosmopolitan promoting an unhealthy body type? Will people suddenly feel the urge to gain a significant amount of weight? Not only were there questions, but there were furious statements about how Cosmopolitan was being irresponsible by featuring a fat woman on the cover of their magazine. And they and Tess Holliday were sending the message that being positive is more important than being healthy. In a horrifying Reddit post posted to the Ask Women subreddit, asking people's opinions on the controversial cover, most people in the comments expressed disgust with Tess's supposed agenda and saying that she was what was wrong with America, believing in lies which contradict all evidence because it is convenient. Sure, people can have different opinions, but there is only one set of facts. The fact about obesity is that it is a national health crisis, and people who promote it should be ashamed. Peach Snails writes, quote, "Wish they'd pick a middle ground between stick thin and morbidly obese." Some users who are fat themselves commented on how they hated being super fat and how it's not healthy to be too fat or too skinny. Sweet Tea Bags echoed a similar sentiment, although with much more resentment. I hate how the industry doesn't show the average female and shows either super fucking skinny or super fucking fat. Tess Holliday is a terrible person, and not because she's morbidly obese. I don't see a problem with the criticism of her because it's justified. I don't like the fact that we don't see more average bodies like mine that are only slightly overweight, like 30 pounds or less, but not obese. However, don't take this as bashing obese models. I'm glad they're finally being represented, but that's not the majority of people. We're definitely not represented because we're too ordinary and thus won't sell. The modeling industry is just doing what they're doing, which is catering to capitalism's call. Nothing wrong with that, but it needs some improvement as is. I just hate that they went from one extreme to the other. Honestly, I would rather have seen someone of Adele or Rebel Wilson's weight on the cover than Tess Holliday. LDN_escort thinks fat activism is de rigueur nowadays. But just as with overly skinny models, I don't think we should be promoting that sort of unhealthy lifestyle or normalizing a 5'5" woman weighing nearly 300 pounds. People die of obesity, especially morbid obesity, all the time. They get heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, sleep apnea, etc., and it's entirely preventable. Obviously, not everyone needs to look the same, but there's an ocean of difference between, for instance, an Ashley Graham even pre-weight loss and a Tess Holliday. The part that is so confusing to me is that, like climate change, the science on obesity is more or less settled. It is radically detrimental to one's health to be as obese as she is. We're supposed to ignore that because she has a pretty face with expertly applied makeup. Don't get me wrong, she has the right to exist and she has the right to eat herself into obesity, but as some sort of role model, my husband is doing pediatric clinicals and he's seeing 5 and 6-year-olds with the precursors to type 2 diabetes. That's absolute insanity, and I've done work for my company as a data analyst for a government study, and if current debates trends continue, treatment of the disease and comorbidities could literally bankrupt us as a country. One person asked why they can't just put normal looking women on the cover, claiming that she isn't plus size, she's obese. What? And needs to lose weight. The Redditor describes themselves as a very fat person and that they don't want it glorified because it's dangerous. And then in their edit, they say, you know what would be awesome? Seeing a muscular or athletic woman on Cosmo. I actually think it is a type of misogyny to promote unhealthiness to women. Wow, so it's misogynistic for a fat person to be on the cover of a magazine. Interesting take there. I'm all for loving yourself no matter what you look like, but at some point you have to step back and look at the whole picture. Is it fine for overweight people to look up to Tess Holliday so they can have some self-confidence like her? Yes. Is it okay for people to think she's healthy and idolize her for that? No. And a particularly egregious comment from one Redditor. They say, quote, "She isn't plus size, she's death sized. I know because I was there too. I don't think we should idolize having one foot in the grave or suicide by food. She can do whatever she wants and grace whatever magazine cover she feels like. But there should be a disclaimer underneath her photo warning of the dangers of morbid obesity. She's like the damn Marlboro Man. Nobody should be allowed to make death look cool." Talk about being fucking dramatic. Now, while most of the top comments were extremely anti-fat and ableist, there were a few people sprinkled throughout who pushed back. Some said that while they didn't like Tess Holliday, nor did they consider her a healthy role model, she had a right to be on the cover of the magazine and that it was nice to see someone who wasn't super thin being represented in a major publication. However, even the people who came to Tess's defense made sure to make it clear that while she has a right to be on the cover, and not everyone on a magazine cover needs to be thin, she was not healthy, and she should not lie about her health. For example, one Redditor said, quote, "It's just a cover. I don't see why fat women have to justify and defend not hating themselves. I'm not 100% sure if she claims to be healthy. If she does, that's disingenuous of her specifically. But as a whole, fat women are always forced to specify that they aren't advocating a certain lifestyle, when that's never the point of what they're doing anyways. One can decide they are beautiful and aren't going to be disgusted with themselves while simultaneously understanding that they can be healthier." They continue by saying that while others are commenting that she shouldn't be idolized or a role model, women like her are never seen as role models, and that if Tess wants to advocate for loving herself at any size, what's wrong with that? Someone replied to this comment saying, "She does claim to be healthy." End of sentence. Like, okay. But it wasn't just random people on Reddit who were outraged by this cover. Feminist icon Piers Morgan weighed in as well. Tess excitedly exclaimed on Instagram that she was a Cosmo girl. Piers stepped in to remind her that she had nothing to be excited about, and he was about to be the leading charge for a group of angry fat phobes who insisted that their criticism was about health, not fat shaming.
What are you actually trying to achieve with this cover? And I read the interview. And the interview, never once, you do the interview, I think, don't you?
I did the interview, yeah.
Never once in the entire thing, with all the pictures and the interview, do you, as the editor of Cosmo, even infer that this may not be a good weight to be, that this actually might be morbid obesity. And in Britain right now, we have the worst incidence of obesity.
And an extremely hard to watch Good Morning Britain interview with the former editor of Cosmopolitan, who conducted the interview with Tess Holliday. Piers accuses the editor of promoting obesity and, like everyone else, keeps harping on the fact that Tess Holliday is a 300-pound woman. I'm not going to go bit by bit of this interview because I watched it in full and I don't want to put you guys through that. And also because he just regurgitates the same shit that the people on Reddit were saying and the people who always cry glorifying obesity say. Like, the arguments are never interesting or surprising. What was surprising, though, was the editor who stuck to her guns and defended the cover and and Tess Holliday's right to exist on the cover. Pierre's co-host, who clearly can't stand him, and boy did I feel for her watching this, also was in complete disagreement with Pierre's opinions. Another woman on the panel also regurgitates statements we've already heard. She used to be fat, and no longer is, and similar to many former fat people, she feels like she is like the fat expert, and is qualified to suggest that if you are fat, you should be sporty, and you should be trying to get healthy. She also does the classic, well, you wouldn't put someone who was an alcoholic on the cover with a bottle of vodka, because people love comparing fatness to substance abuse for some idiotic reason. The editor does cut in to say that it's not the same, which, thank you. Thank you for being one of the only logical people on this panel.
That morbid obesity is as dangerous as drugs or alcohol. They will.
She's killing herself.
Why are you saying
And also fat people lie constantly.
Oh my God, lady, are you okay?
What fat person hurt you?
Like, seriously, you have some stuff to unpack. Fat people are liars. Like, holy shit, she might hate fat people more than Piers Morgan does. The editor then goes into her own history with negative body image and EDs growing up, and how we live in a culture that venerates thinness.
Do you know what? If there are, and I honestly don't believe this, if there are a minority of people out there who go, do you know what? Morbid obesity is the way for me. If, on the other hand, there are millions of people who see this and they've never been exposed to a body like this before, if they go, actually, do you know what? For one day only, I'm going to feel great about myself.
Been exposed to bodies like this. You can go to what you're doing is you're celebrating this body image.
If you watch this interview in full, one thing you quickly pick up on is the fact that Piers doesn't really have a strong argument. He just keeps restating that it's celebrating this body image and how she's dangerously overweight. His statements, especially in regard to her health, are unfounded and baseless, and yet that is his argument, and instead of actually speaking to what the editor is saying, which is that women who look like her deserve to be represented, he has to keep circling back to the fact that this is about health. Do you not care about health? An Instagram post that Piers Morgan sent out during this debacle included a photo of the cover with a caption stating, "As Britain battles an ever-worsening obesity crisis, this is the new cover of Cosmo." Apparently, we're supposed to view it as a huge step forward for body positivity. What a load of baloney. This cover is just as dangerous and misguided as celebrating size 0 models. This, and like some other Reddit comments we read, perfectly exemplify the insidious ways in which people try to paint their anti-fat bias with the veneer of altruism. On some level, people who are this blatantly fatphobic are aware of the fact that what they are saying is mean. So in order to not seem one-sided, like they're just dunking on fat people, they throw in a couple lines about how it's bad to be super skinny too. I mean, I just think there should be a middle ground, not too fat or too skinny. I've also heard this uttered by people who may be slightly more earnest, people who aren't blatantly anti-fat but seem to actually believe in what they are saying. And while I understand what they are saying to some degree, I don't agree, because I don't think people who say that fully understand what exactly they are implying. For one, they never explain what exactly they mean by a middle ground or not being too fat or too skinny. What does that mean? You're saying I should be in the middle? Where is the middle? What does that look like? If we're to falsely believe that weight is the only indicator of health, what exact weight number should I be at to reach this mythical middle ground? 2, this statement implies that people choose their own bodies and are in complete control of their weight and just need to choose the healthy one. There are many factors that can influence your weight, and those factors, for the most part, are not necessarily in the hands of the individual. As Aubrey Gordon says, most people do not choose their body size. There are fat people who have attempted to lose weight their entire lives and have never lost any significant amount of weight, and for many, their bodies did the opposite of the intended outcome. Long-term weight loss has a single-digit success rate, so when you say it's not good to be too fat, what is one supposed to do with that information? Is that person now supposed to just magically form into a more socially acceptable body type that's just the right mixture of fat and skinny? Tess Holliday was not the first or the last fat person to be accused of glorifying obesity, and this will not be the first fat person to be featured on the cover of Cosmopolitan magazine. In 2016, body-positive yoga instructor Jessamine Stanley was interviewed in an article for Cosmo titled, "This Inspiring Yoga Teacher is Proving That Plus Size Can Still Mean Healthy." Jessamine describes herself on her IG page as a fat femme who fucking loves yoga. Her account and social media presence is dedicated to normalizing the image of fat people doing yoga and inspiring people of all sizes to engage in the activity. The author writes that she is here as a reminder that it is possible to be big and to be healthy at the same time. Jessamine says that you literally can't determine anything about a person's health just by looking at them, and that there are so many different ways to be healthy. Leading a healthy lifestyle is what's important, the author writes. Jessamine says that just because she's an advocate for body positivity doesn't mean people should want to emulate her every move, and that she just wants to inspire people to live their best life. The article ends saying, "What a brilliant, brilliant attitude." This article came out in 2016, but it wasn't until 2021 that she was actually featured on the cover of the magazine, wearing a gray sports bra and leggings with "This is healthy" written under her yoga pose. This might surprise you, but this cover caused some controversy. Once again, people claim that this cover was promoting obesity, and since this was issued during the pandemic, which was also when a new wave of fat phobia had been circling the internet due to reports that fat people were more at risk of COVID. People commented on how it was, I guess, inappropriate for fat people to be featured as prominently on a magazine cover since there was a correlation between fatness and COVID.
Comparing a pandemic to fatness is not the same. Fat people are not a pandemic. You can't catch fatness.
She, along with Callie Thorpe, a fat influencer who advocates self-love, were platformed in this issue specifically about health and expanding people's perceptions on what health can look like. The issue is literally titled, "This is Healthy." Despite that declaration, though, there were many who disagreed, and like with Tess, the concern over health was used to justify their obvious disdain for fat bodies. 2 years before this, a plus-size model and activist by the name of Angelina Duplicia starred in Miley Cyrus's Mother's Daughter music video. She appeared naked, her large body on full display as we can see her hips, her thighs, her cellulite, her rolls, everything. Everything that scares fat phobes. And how did the public react? Well, let's just say there was a little bit of an outrage because she was, let me see, what does that say? Glorifying obesity? Angelina actually ended up appearing on Good Morning Britain to be fat-shamed and to have her intelligence insulted by Piers Morgan shortly after this controversy had surfaced. Piers brings up the Tess Holiday Cosmo cover and says how, like her appearance in the music video, there's no mention of this being a dangerous weight. Angelina, my queen, clapped back by saying,
"Honestly, if you were really concerned about people being obese and representing something bad, you would take yourself off the air because you're not exactly slim yourself."
Well,
right?
okay, I'm 200.
Piers goes on the defensive and explains that he may be a little fat, but he isn't as fat as her.
120 pounds and I'm 6'1", right? You're 5'4" and you're 380 pounds. So
when Angelina says, "So what? You're still fat," his response is, "I'm not in a Miley Cyrus pop video." To which Angelina says, "Well, you're on fucking TV, aren't you?"
You're on TV. You're on TV. You're on TV every day.
So you think that me
You're
sitting here now...
You're on TV every day. You're going to tell me that...
You think, just to clarify, there is a comparison between me sitting here now, 6'1", 220 pounds, I am reflecting and celebrating a clinically dangerous level of weight.
Piers keeps reminding her that this is all out of respect. He keeps saying, "With respect to you," every time he's about to fat shame her to her face and tell her about her health status. Very respectful. So I actually went and watched the music video. Angelina appears nearly 30 seconds in, and her appearance is about 6 seconds. She doesn't appear at any other point in the music video from what I could see. The entire music video is about body positivity and inclusivity. It also features people with disabilities, people of color, non-binary people, and trans people. Alexander Moores, the director of the music video, said the message put forth by the video is feminist. The video is about the woman's body. The right to own your own body and make it free from the male gaze, in any way, shape, and form. It's a broad message, and we're not trying to be dogmatic, but we're living in difficult times in America, and what I get from this video is that it injects a lot of energy and determination and the right fuel for the struggle. What's really disheartening about these anti-fat backlashes is that they are often in response to something that is extremely positive. I'm not like a Cosmo fan or anything. They have a weird history with the way they talk about women's issues, especially in regard to sex, but that article with Tess Holiday, or at least the first half of it that is available on the internet, is about this woman's struggle with abuse, bullying, and self-love. She talks about her dad being verbally abusive, especially towards her mom. She admits that she did not always love her body, but eventually learned to and was happy and wanted to embrace her body and show it off to the world. A world that she knows will reject her body at every turn because she had already experienced that rejection growing up. And to be clear, I am not by any means a Tess Holiday stan. I've heard she is controversial for other reasons that have nothing to do with her weight, but I think it's important to understand that that just because you come to someone's defense doesn't exactly mean that you endorse them and everything that they do. I'm using her as a perfect example of the toxic discourse that spread around the new Instagram-approved body positivity movement in the 2010s. You see, Tess Holliday did not possess a body we were used to seeing. Sure, we had Melissa McCarthy, but we were not used to seeing a woman of her size being platformed in this way. Tess Holliday wasn't mid-size. She wasn't a small fat. She wasn't Amy Schumer fat. She was a mid-fat woman, which on the fatness spectrum is not even as fat as people made it seem, but is still fatter than what we were used to. Her thick thighs were large and fleshy. Her arms were big and soft. Her breasts were prominent, and her stomach wasn't small or a little pudgy. It was big and round. She didn't even represent the version of fat that we had deemed acceptable by that point, i.e. an Amy Schumer to Ashley Graham body type. When people cry glorifying obesity, so many things are revealed about the person saying them. So many things are revealed about their logic and their thought process. Pierce said in his Instagram post about the Tess Cosmo cover that it would be just as misguided and dangerous to celebrate size 0 models. This is also a common talking point people use when they cry about glorifying obesity. It's one of the most annoying talking points because it is absolute bullshit. Yes, we have historically criticized beauty standards that promote an extreme and unattainable version of thinness. And yes, people who are very thin also experience body shaming, body policing, and assumptions about their eating habits, which is wrong. But then people are on the covers of magazines all the damn time and they don't really receive this level of backlash. You don't really see peers complaining when there is an extremely thin model on the cover of a magazine because it's not true that it would be viewed as just as misguided and dangerous.
Would you be happy with skeletal models doing it?
You talk about it.
Would you be happy with a really skinny, really ill-looking skinny model appearing in that video? Would you be happy with that?
I think if someone is like that...
Yeah.
But she wasn't born like that. She's made herself that way.
What if someone was literally starving themselves and we celebrated it by putting it on the cover of Cosmo? You would not like that. And that's the hypocrisy of this debate, is that because people are massively overweight, we're not allowed to say, actually, that's unhealthy. I think we should be able to.
People put themselves through very punishing regimes to be on the front of magazines. I think it's very hard to be...
Tess Holliday's only punishing regime on that cover was to eat lots of food.
What's so funny, though, is that most of the people featured in the Miley Cyrus music video are thin, like extremely thin, including Miley herself. And they aren't saying anything about them. I mean, if we're to just assume things about people based solely on how they look, I can assume that some of those people have eating disorders. And if we're to assume that some of the thin people in the music video have eating disorders, then I can also argue that the music video is also promoting disordered eating, because why not? And listen, many people do have that assumption of thin people. But is that right? People like to compare this to the criticism models face for promoting unhealthy beauty standards. People say, well, we do criticize size 0 models and call them unhealthy. While that is true, it's ignoring that it wasn't purely just skinny shaming, although that was certainly part of it. Most of that stems from the fact that it is known that many models, especially the ones who were popular during the supermodel era, were engaging in disordered eating to full-on eating disorders to abusing diet pills in order to maintain an extremely thin body. And because this is America and we have to shame people first before we can empathize with them, this revelation was used as a way not to broaden the discussion around EDs or body image, but to shame women specifically for being extremely thin, making bony jokes and Big Bert jokes, comparing thin people to a Slim Jim or a literal stick. You couple this in with the long history of thinness being glorified, being a symbol of asceticism, and a sign of ill health all at once. There are celebrities whose bodies have been labeled as scary skinny. This all comes back to our staunch refusal to accept the fact that you cannot determine anything about a person, period, just by looking at them. So while I acknowledge that skinny shaming is a thing and is bad, it is notable and it should set off alarm bells for you that the only time this argument about health and promoting ill health comes up is when a fat person, on the extremely rare occasion, appears on the cover of a magazine.
What people are getting mad at, they're mad at having to see a fat person who's not, like, apologizing to them for the way that they look. But, like, people's brains don't let them realize what's going on, right? They're like, no, it doesn't bother me that somebody else looks a way that I don't approve of. It's like, no, this is her motivation. This is what she's trying to do. Or like, this is the impact that she's going to have on the world. And the whole thing is basically just like reaching for any reason for you to justify your really gross emotional response.
Yeah, it's totally an emotional response. And it is an emotional response that gets elevated to a level of like, this needs to be a societal concern. And it elevates a picture of like a fat person at a pizza parlor into some level of like political agenda.
Right.
Even if that fat person is not espousing any political agenda at all, right?
Right.
It's the fact of a photograph of a fat person who's not like inside a Weight Watchers meeting center,
right,
or running around a track and crying, I guess. And I think there is this little like Rube Goldberg machine that kicks off in the brains of people who have this level of discomfort, which is if there are images of fat people not actively trying to lose weight or suffering in the world, then people who are not currently fat will think it's okay to get fat and will start getting fat.
Right.
And people who
right.
are fat will never get thin as a result of this one photograph on Instagram.
I guess the idea is that like the reason fatness became more prominent in the 1980s is that like there started to be photos of fat people and we glorified it too much.
Michael, the 80s is when we got Dom DeLuise.
Bob Hoskins.
As one Redditor wrote, I think it brings out a lot of people who pretend to care about women's health when in reality they just think she's gross and don't want to see her on a magazine cover. None of them are out there advocating for representation and healthy living at any other time except when a fat woman gets the spotlight. Then suddenly everybody is a doctor and is super concerned. Or supposedly concerned. In these arguments, people claim a lot of things. They claim they just don't think someone with her health should be idolized. But they also claim that she has a right to be fat and to exist, but they never end there. They have to end with a but. Do not let obesity hijack the body positivity movement. This will make you physically sick and mentally sick. Like, girl, get her money though, and she is a person who deserves the same rights and treatments as anyone else. But this ain't it, Chief. What ain't it, Chief? What isn't it? What is the problem here? You just said she should get her money and that she is a person who deserves rights and normal human treatment. So what isn't it exactly?
I don't understand. I don't understand, bitch.
Glorifying obesity is not a thing. Point blank, period. No one has ever been able to fully define it or truly break down exactly what they mean when they make this claim against fat people. Glorifying obesity criers say that it's fine if they're fat and that it's just about health. And it's like, okay, let's explore that. So if it's not about fat shaming, as you say, and it's about health, then we need to look at the broader picture, as one might say. I have a few questions to start off. For one, are we assuming that celebrities who are thin and often appear on the covers of magazines healthy? Actors in general have always been required to maintain a specific body type for many of the roles they get cast in. Zac Efron famously spoke about the incredibly unhealthy workout regime and diet he had to partake in during the shooting of Baywatch in an article for Men's Health. He was overtraining, taking diuretics, which are water pills, getting up super early, even when there were late shoots, and while his body was glorified by the media and there were articles telling people how to get his Baywatch body, this entire thing left Zac Efron with intense insomnia and caused him to slip into a bad depression. So not only was this physically unhealthy for him, it was mentally unhealthy. Brendan Fraser has also spoken about the negative effects of the extremely low-calorie diet he was on for George of the Jungle. He says he was starved of carbohydrates and that it impacted his memory. Natalie Portman was required to work out 6 to 8 hours a day and was put on a strict diet for her role in Black Swan. She prepared for that role over the course of a year and actually started her ballerina training while still filming another movie before the shooting of Black Swan even began. Mila Kunis, who also starred in the film, was required to work out 7 days a week for 4 to 5 hours a day, was put on a very restrictive diet. During the promotion for the film, Mila said she tried to do it in the healthiest way possible, but revealed in 2016 that she also consistently smoked cigarettes as well.
Be a smoker, and so I smoked a lot of cigarettes and I ate like a limited amount of calories. It was a 1,200 or less calorie diet a day. I'd say an average of 1,200 calories a day.
Oh, that's torture.
Yeah, it's awful. 1,200 calories, and then I smoked. Like I don't advocate this at all.
I hate to bring her up because she sucks, but Amy Schumer talked about crash dieting for her role in Trainwreck. The idea of actors having to be a certain size to get roles is actually what is de rigueur, because this is such an accepted reality that we have only just begun to question the ethics of. We have always known that not only models but famous actors and singers are required to look a certain way to maintain a career, especially if you're a woman and especially if you're an older woman. We also know that we live in a diet culture, where it is normalized for actors and actresses to be interviewed about their insane dieting and workout regimes, and for the media to promote them as aspirational, only for those same actors to come out years later to warn us of the dangers of these weight loss methods. I don't want to speculate about the health of celebrities because it's none of my business, but actors do not always engage in healthy activity to look how they look for these roles. And again, while I don't want to speculate, we know that crash dieting is bad for you. We know that smoking cigarettes is extremely bad for you. Christian Bale has been weight cycling for almost his entire acting career, and we know that weight cycling isn't healthy either. I'm not trying to say that we should assume all actors and singers are unhealthy, but what we know is many of them have been required to do very unhealthy things for their jobs.
From its inception, when people started to think it was really important to maintain a slender physique, they were using unhealthy ways to achieve it. And that's what we still see today in many instances. So much of the conversation surrounding obesity is like, those people are unhealthy. Fat people are unhealthy. But they ignore the fact that there are a lot of slender people who are unhealthy because they're engaged in these extreme diets that can be extremely detrimental to their health.
And I'm not saying these actors don't get criticized for promoting these dieting and exercise routines, but I don't see Piers Morgan complaining on his show about Baywatch celebrating a certain body image. So cutting in during the edit to say that I did do a little research on whether Piers Morgan has publicly skinny shamed, and he has. He has a history of criticizing Victoria Beckham, an English fashion designer, for using extremely thin models in her campaigns, although his concerns seemed a little more centered around beauty standards. However, I couldn't find too many other examples, and I don't consistently consume Piers Morgan content because I do love myself a little bit, but the whole glorifying obesity thing is something he has spoken about numerous times. One needs only to do a Google search of Piers Morgan glorifying obesity to see that this is something that really grinds his gears. So I feel my point still stands. And to be clear, even if he was equally skinny shaming and fat shaming, that still wouldn't be okay with me and shouldn't be okay with anyone else. Body shaming is wrong, period. Back to the video. If this claim of glorification is all about health, then why aren't people accusing these movies and condemning them for glorifying disordered eating? If this is all about health, then okay, well, there are actors who have health conditions, like Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks has type 2 diabetes, you know, the one we always associate with fatness. Jillian Michaels saying that it's not going to be awesome if Lizzo gets diabetes just screams of ableism and healthism because, like, okay, what if she does? What does that have to do with her being famous? Is Tom Hanks promoting ill health by existing in Hollywood? Should he retire then? Why must one be physically healthy to live their dreams and be a public figure and appear on a magazine? As Angelina Duplessis said to Piers, unhealthy people deserve representation too, don't they? Like, what the fuck? I don't understand this logic. This logic says that we should discriminate against and, I guess, shun people who we confidently suspect are unhealthy. People who are presentably unhealthy should just turn into Patrick Star and go live under a rock.
And also, like, listen, then let's ask the underlying question, which is, I'm sorry, you think it's okay to treat people like garbage if you think they're not healthy?
Right.
You just gonna go around bullying people with chronic illnesses and disability? Like, that's your stance? Like, it's okay that I'm doing this because I think this person is unwell in some way? Like, Jesus Christmas, get a hold of yourself.
The glorifying obesity criers lack so much self-awareness, and that lack has caused them to conveniently ignore that part of themselves that saw a body they weren't used to seeing. And when they saw that body, a fat body that represented everything that they fear, a fat body that they've been conditioned into believing is repulsive, a fat body that they have been consistently told is riddled with heart disease and diabetes, they decided to take that fear, that disgust, and ableism and healthism and place it onto her shoulders as if she had committed a crime against humanity. I am not a bad person, you see. I am not fat shaming. No. I am a good person who is just concerned about health. You, fat person, are the bad person, actually, because you are telling people that it's okay to be fat, and that's dangerous. I'm all for body positivity, but this is just too much.
What makes a woman beautiful? Beautiful is having the courage to reframe your future. What makes a woman beautiful? Her passion, her guts, her glory. At Neutrogena, our job is to help every woman put her best face forward, because beautiful is the ability to look in the mirror and believe that anything is possible. Neutrogena. See what's possible.
On February 28, 2017, Moran O'Connell, an Irish radio and TV broadcaster, posted a picture to twitter.com. The picture was of two young, thin white women, one blonde, one brunette, with their backs turned to highlight their jeans as they both looked back at the camera. In large black letters it read, "Love your curves." The picture was an ad for the clothing brand Zara. She captioned the photo, "You've got to be shitting me, Zara." They weren't shitting her. In an article that was released by CNN after this photo and the surrounding controversy emerged, the author writes, "Fashion retailer Zara is urging women to love your curves, but that body-positive message may be overshadowed by the slender models featured in the campaign." Irish radio personality Moran O'Connell spotted the slogan on a poster in a Dublin store on Tuesday and tweeted about it in disgust. O'Connell stressed that she was not trying to body shame the models. It's nothing against their body frames at all or how they look. They look like beautiful, beautiful women, she told CNN. It's the marketing campaign behind it. Now, of course, it is the internet, so there were people who used this as an opportunity to body shame the models and poked fun at the irony of the ad campaign. But there were also people who felt insulted, like Zara was playing in our faces. It was reminiscent of the Victoria's Secret A Body for Everybody campaign ad that came out in 2014. Where they had 10 incredibly thin models all standing together in their bra and underwear. And it's kind of hilarious how much they all look exactly the same. It's like they were playing The Sims and just duplicated the same sim 9 times, but just changed their skin color and gave them all slightly different hairstyles. Like, that's what this picture looks like. And the problem isn't that these women are skinny. The problem is that they're all skinny, and your ad says a body for everybody. Like, is this supposed to be a joke? Is this satire? Or are you just trying to sell me something while wanting to feel like a good person at the same time? This same year, British reality television star of Made in Chelsea fame, Louise Thompson, posted a picture of herself looking very tan and in athletic wear, posing for the camera. I am so excited to announce that I'll be bringing out my first book in May next year. After a lot of deliberation, I have decided to call my book Body Positive, because I think this book reflects the changes that I have made to my life and my mind and body over the past few years. You guys know how obsessed I am with cooking and eating, so I will be including my favorite 15-minute home workouts with some delicious recipes and insider scoop to help you guys transform your approach to fitness and food. I want everyone to be able to make changes to build a strong body and mind to be proud of. And I always get so many requests from you guys for my workout regime, food diary, so I thought it would be a no-brainer. As many of you have followed my journey over the past 8 years, you know I haven't always shown myself a lot of love or respect, and I certainly never had a flat tummy. I wasn't particularly happy, but now I am. And I want to share my own personal journey and all the ups and downs with you. I'm currently locking myself away writing it, so if there's anything you desperately want me to include, please comment below or write to me. In July of 2017, she was featured on the cover of Women's Health, which if you look at it, is blatantly celebrating her thin body and her abs and is advising you to get her abs in 10 moves. Was there a backlash over this magazine cover? Of course not. But there was a backlash to her upcoming body positive book, especially when the bookseller posted the cover to Instagram. Many people called this insulting. For many, this was the nail in the coffin. Fat positive activist and writer Stephanie Yeboah took to Twitter to express her frustrations over this book and how it was emblematic of the mainstreaming of body positivity. It's extremely annoying. People who fall within what society considers beautiful have hijacked yet another movement and have molded it to fit their diet industry agenda. I'm so sick of it. Bopo was never supposed to stand for this. The absolute nerve. Later on in the thread, she says, the actual intention of body positivity is not any action that makes you feel body positive about your body. The intention is size acceptance. What about this book screams size acceptance? It's just another way for people to make money off the marginalized. Other Twitter users seem to agree with Stephanie. What the ever-living fuck is this? Someone wrote. This is utter bullshit and just another moment in the ongoing abuse of the body positive movement for commercial gain. Another user quote tweeted, what's important to keep in mind is that it's not bad for her to be body positive about her body. There's nothing wrong with her wanting to do whatever it is she wants to do in order to have the body that she feels will make her happy. It's easy to interpret this as another form of body policing. Are thin women not allowed to be considered curvy? I mean, having a curvy figure can look like anything, right? Listen, curviness doesn't necessarily have a weight limit, but yes, many types of bodies can have curves. Demi Lovato is a good example of someone who has been thin and curvaceous. But if you look at the picture, these women are not curvy. They're just not. That's not an insult, just an observation. As many fat writers have pointed out, it feels like they just slap that on there to seem inclusive without actually doing anything inclusive. In the case of Louise Thompson, her book is essentially a diet and wellness book. Regardless of how you feel about dieting and wellness, body positivity is not about dieting or adapting to a fitness routine that will help you flatten your tummy. Nothing wrong with wanting to seek weight loss, but that's simply not what body positivity is about. It's not about changing the way you view fitness and food. However, those who don't know much about the history of body positivity would insist that it is, or that it should be. Towards the end of this tweet thread, Stephanie says, "Can we not have our own safe spaces where we can celebrate what makes us unique without smaller, slimmer people infiltrating it and trying to turn it into something else? This isn't for you." Hearing that body positivity isn't for everybody, I think angers some people. People take these backlashes and criticisms and turn them into a symbol of why body positivity is bullshit because they don't even want you to lose weight and she's just promoting health. It should be about health too. This was really at the peak of the IG approved body positive movement during this time. And what was surprising doing research on criticisms of body positivity is that these criticisms have been around for a while. Stephanie wasn't the last person to complain about how body positivity had been co-opted by thin white women, and the talking points that were born from body positivity and fat activists were being used to promote diet culture and, well, thinness. Going back to the person responding to the Miley Cyrus tweet that falsely warned people to not let obesity hijack the body positivity movement, someone replied to that comment saying, "Super rich considering what actually happened is that thin people hijacked the body positivity movement, which was started by fat people standing up for the right to, just exist and be treated with respect." As I previously discussed in my Dove video, the 2010s was an era where femvertising had blossomed and had become the new norm for corporations trying to appeal to women. Dove set off a popular marketing trend in the 2010s during the rise of the hashtag girlboss, a term coined by Sophia Amoruso, founder of the fashion retailer Nasty Gal, who wrote a whole book on how to be a girl boss, which was released in 2014. All this gave rise to a new capitalist-approved vision of feminism and female empowerment, girl boss feminism. What set girl bosses apart from regular bosses was pitting feminism to hustle. Women like Facebook's Sheryl Sandberg and former Nasty Gal CEO Sophia Amoruso, who coined the term, were finally wrangling power away from the men who had held it for so long, which was seen as a form of justice. As the concept was codified, the idea of the girl boss became about the melding of professional self and identity, capitalist aspiration, and a specifically and arguably limited vision of empowerment. Girl boss feminism is an extension of choice feminism, defined by F Word magazine as the belief that the individual choices of a woman are inherently feminist. The term was originally coined by the late feminist writer Linda Hirschman in 2006. The first thing I think of when I think of choice feminism is that famous Lena Dunham quote, which is, "Part of being a feminist is giving other women the freedom to make choices you don't necessarily agree with." Both choice feminism and girl boss feminism are basically subcategories for white feminism, a type of feminism that mostly concerns the issues of white women and privileged white women and ignores the needs of any woman who doesn't fit in that category.
White feminism, and this is something I actually like to talk about recently, because I think recently it gets conflated with white women who are feminists, and they're not the same thing. There are many white women who are obviously vocal against what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank. And Susan Sarandon got dropped by UTA. Billie Eilish has spoken out. Boy Genius, all these people. White feminism is a brand of feminism that is essentially exclusive to white cis women. And I think one of the tenets of it is that it really centers the self and the individual as the most important part of women's rights, essentially. And so you kind of see that within these more defensive positions that Amy Schumer takes on, or in her comedy, right? She like we were saying, she's made quite a lot of leaps in terms of what she's doing for white women in comedy, but then she simultaneously will have these routines that are at the expense of marginalized people, marginalized women. I think she is probably the poster child for white feminism.
Now, while I was born right before the early 2000s, I came of age, I guess, during the 2010s. The girl boss choice feminist era is what informed a lot of my politics at the time. Any woman could be seen as feminist or a girl boss simply for holding powerful positions at their job, or for being a politician, or for being a successful businesswoman, regardless of what the business they're working for is selling or the politics they espouse. The only important thing is that they are successful, and that success is offered as a sign that the times are changing, because look, women can be powerful and rich like men, and they shall be praised for it. Everyday women now were influenced and emboldened to become their own girl bosses and to take on a hustle mentality, talking points that were used as a tool to dupe women into MLMs, aka multi-level marketing schemes. They were also being told that they didn't need to feel guilty anymore about their personal life choices, particularly choices that straight and feminine women were encouraged and sometimes felt pressured to make. Whether you have a tendency to put on a full face of makeup anytime you left the house, to being a housewife, to dressing in scantily clad clothing, to shaving your pussycat, in the eyes of choice feminism, this was fine and was no longer seen as setting back the feminist movement. Feminism didn't have to amount to whatever those annoying, hairy-legged feminists were telling us in the 70s. Feminism could be whatever we wanted it to be. It was like phloem. You could roll it, mold it, and cover it. Turn it into whatever you want it to mean. At this time, this sounded alright. Actually, choice feminism sounded really appealing. It seemed like a type of feminism that we could all get on board with. Yes, women have historically been conditioned into believing body hair is unhygienic and unfeminine, but hey, if you choose to shave your legs, that's still a feminist act. Don't worry, darling. Choice feminism was enticing because finally women didn't have to feel guilty for engaging in the type of self-care women have always been expected to engage in for very misogynistic reasons. We could feel like we were actually helping push the feminist movement forward by making our own choices to do what we wanted. We were reclaiming our power. As Michelle Ferguson, an associate professor at the University of Colorado, says, choice feminism is motivated by a fear of politics. It arises in response to three common criticisms of feminism: that feminism is too radical, too exclusionary, and too judgmental. In response, choice feminism offers a worldview that does not challenge the status quo, that promises to include all women regardless of their choices, and that abstains from judgment altogether. In a lot of ways, as this relates to femvertising, as in ads devoted to uplifting and empowering women and girls, these companies also want to be abstained from judgment. Dove had laid the groundwork. They did man-on-the-street interviews with real women and asked them about their insecurities, which they admitted to without hesitation. They had real women on their self-love campaign posters, and they were telling us that this was real beauty. Dove was then positioned as this soft and caring company because they were giving a voice to women who felt they didn't fit into society's modern beauty standards. Can't you hear the soft piano and the guitar? Don't you see the white background and the deep, thought-provoking quotes we threw in at the end there? See, we care about women. Look at all the studies we've produced that prove women hate themselves. And look at how we're trying to change that, one ad at a time. These ads were popular and appealing to many because not only were they allegedly representing real women, the content within the ads were relatable to a lot of women. Like in 2017, Pantene did a Sorry Not Sorry ad asking why are women always apologizing. The video is centered around multiple different women, mostly white, consistently apologizing for minuscule things they shouldn't be apologizing for, until they finally decide to stop saying sorry. Feminism. But none of these ads are actually that challenging to the status quo. It just put women's issues at the forefront in a way that forced everyone to listen. In an article for Harvard Politics titled Girl Boss Gaslight Gatekeep, Feminism in a Capitalistic World, the author writes, quote, since choice feminism is rooted in individualism, it's also intrinsically tied to capitalism and lacks a deep analysis of how class and race intersect with gender. We continue the status quo, an inherently unjust capitalistic society, under the guise of gender equality. Furthermore, choice and girl boss feminism don't adequately address racialized misogyny. Much of the discrimination Black women and brown women face stems from their intersectional identities as women of color. Intersectionality, a term coined by Black critical race theorist Kimberly Crenshaw, is practically non-existent in these ads. Intersectionality, to put it simply, is defined as a sociological analytical framework that speaks to the distinctive ways in which race, gender, and class can overlap and create unique hardships that may not be shared by all marginalized people. Sure, they'd sometimes have Black women, usually biracial, and every blue moon some that were dark-skinned appear in these ads, but they hardly featured women who weren't able-bodied and who weren't cis, which really makes the real beauty, real women thing seem kind of gross in retrospect. If these women are the only ones being represented as real, that sure leaves out a whole fuck ton of women who look nothing like them.
We are real women. We are. What a great thing to be. This new line of products won't change your life. Only you can do that. And you can do that.
So much of these ads put an emphasis on physical strength, believing in yourself and being able to do anything you put your mind to. But what if you don't have the ability to be strong in the narrow definition in which it's being applied here? Are you not allowed in the Women's Empowerment Club? Some people might ask, well, did you really expect a shampoo ad to end patriarchy? Were you actually expecting Dove to solve your body image issues? Well, no, but that's not really the point. Feminism should never have been commodified in this way. It isn't supposed to be cute. The issues of feminism shouldn't be reduced to a sorry not sorry hashtag. Feminism isn't just a hashtag, it's a political movement meant to address issues that don't just concern conventionally attractive women with long, luscious hair, or women making billions of dollars. It is meant to put an end to not just sexism or oppression, but capitalism. So to present feminism in a way that is palatable rather than radical, nuanced, and intersectional is to present a kind of feminism that is ahistorical, misleading, and pointless. It dumbs down feminism and molds it into something unserious. This brand of feminism did not really push the movement forward. It wanted to stress the importance of women being financially independent and in control of their own destinies, but it didn't stress the importance of equity. It was more about power, consumerism, and acting like a man.
Chew tobacco like a man.
And spit like a man.
But as the wise Audre Lorde once famously said, for the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. And this fact is only threatening to those women who still define the master's house as their only source of support. You can't smash the patriarchy with capitalism because capitalism and patriarchy are intertwined. That's why the girl boss eventually fell from grace. As Lee Stein said in 2020, the rise and fall of the girl boss says more about how comfortable we've become mixing capitalism with social justice, as we look to corporations to implement social changes because we've lost faith in our public institutions to do so. Going back to the Quirky Pineapple article, the author explains that researchers have found that femvertisements can sometimes lead to better conversations around gender roles. But they also add that the irony here is the diluted feminist messages don't necessarily push folks towards deeper reflection regarding gender stereotypes, inclusion, or cultural competence. In other words, folks became so exposed to empowering messages that they start assuming they already know and are woke without being self-reflective or aware of their own biases, stories, culture, beliefs, and harmful behavior. This is where we finally connect this to the body positivity movement. But first, we must talk about its history, its actual history, and how capitalism, white feminism, and good old-fashioned fat phobia hijacked it and ultimately caused its recent but expected demise.
How do I resist the temptation to eat? Oh, well, it's...
What you need is willpower. Betsy, go instant.
When you sit down in a chair and you hang over the sides a little, then what do you need?
What you need is willpower. Betsy, go instant.
If you eat that piece of cake, you'll put on about 600 calories.
What's the penalty for thinking about it?
The delicious and satisfying 225-calorie meal, now at a new low price.
Fat, we are told, is ugly. It's self-indulgent, therefore immoral. It's certainly un-American, for the President's Council on Physical Fitness has declared war on it. You know who said that? Lou Louderback. A man you have probably never heard of. Now, there isn't much information on the internet about Lou and his life, but what we do know is that in the fall of 1967, Lou Louderback had some shit to get off his chest. He had it with the diet industry, people fat-shaming his wife, and the societal treatment of fat people as a whole. So he wrote an article for the Saturday Evening Post titled, "More People Should Be Fat." In it, he criticizes diet culture and talks about how we live in a society that worships thinness. He says there is something distinctly unhealthy, even sinister, in the anti-fat madness that has swept this country in recent years. American culture, for all its liberal ideas, seems intent on forcing a single acceptable form of body build on everyone, including those whom nature has endowed differently.
Sometimes loneliness, disappointment, or sheer boredom tempt young and old alike to indulge in food to the point where eating replaces other normal activities, often with consequences particularly sad for the young, for many of the natural joys of youth may slip away from the too fat.
Throughout this article, he talks about what he calls the slimness cult, and how fat people are damn near killing themselves by pursuing the fruitless efforts of weight loss and dieting.
In order to get our point across and make people believe us when we say that the medical profession is lying when they paint us all as gluttons, we have to quote medical research that we've looked up in medical journals. And it would feel much better to me if I could just say, you know, I eat totally normally, I eat no more than the average slim person, and you would believe me. And there's a whole bunch of legal discriminations based on our eating so much more, like you can't get a job, etc. And I think that that really has to change because it makes us crazy. It invalidates the way we see the world. And it means that, in effect, we end up having to spend our lives starving and thinking that that's normal.
Lou felt people's disdain for fatness was rooted in Puritanism, classism, and an ugly snobbery. Midway through, he discusses the harsh reality of anti-fat job discrimination. Any fat man knows that the overweight executive has virtually no chance at all of securing a decent position. Even if he gets past the employment agencies, he'll find that personnel directors are reluctant to hire him. Well, thank God we solved that problem.
And employers may feel that overweight makes an individual undesirable for certain positions.
There are many banger lines in this article, but there's one line that I think is deserving of its own cute background and glittery font. The fat, we are told, are not a true minority. They are not permanently imprisoned by the physical characteristics that make them different. They can always join the majority by becoming thin. That's what we are told, but it simply isn't true. In 1969, Bill Fabray, who was an engineer, read this article, and he too was pissed off about the way his fat wife Joyce was being treated. So he made copies of the article and sent them out to friends and acquaintances. It was then that he and Lou Lauterbach formed a small group called the National Association to Aid Fat Americans, which is now known as NAFA, the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. In 1967, a young Jewish man by the name of Steve Post, who would later gain fame as a radio personality in the 80s, held the first ever Fat-In in Central Park. People of all heights and sizes came to burn their diet books and brandish protest signs that read, "Buddha was fat," and "Take a fat girl to dinner." Steve himself had experienced anti-fat discrimination as well, once weighing 250 pounds before losing weight by the time of the Fat-In. The advertising campaigns have attempted to make us feel guilty about our size. We want to show we feel happy, but not guilty. That's why we're here.
A while back, we heard that a group of fat Americans were planning to hold a convention in Washington. The National Association to Aid Fat Americans, they call themselves. It wasn't going to be a diet seminar, they said, nothing like Overeaters Anonymous. Instead, it would be a weekend dedicated to fat pride, fat liberation. Well, that intrigued us, so we asked if we might sit in, and they agreed. 150 fat people, most of them female, from all across the country, come together in a kind of consciousness-raising session. They let us listen in on their hang-ups, their professed joys, and their problems.
As we enter the 1970s, we see the rise of the radical therapy movement, a movement born from psychiatrists and activists who felt the state of modern psychiatry didn't adequately address or treat the issues faced by marginalized people. A major concept of radical therapy is that oppression goes unchallenged if it is mystified. That is, its true nature is concealed. The oppressors do not say to the victims, "We will torture you until you submit to our will." Rather, they say, and often believe, this treatment may seem painful or unfair, but it is for your own good. This, coupled with NAFA and the Fat Pride movement, gave two women by the names of Sarah Golda Brasha Fishman and Judy Freespirit the idea to form the Fat Underground. On the other side of the U.S., a group of California feminists were also angry about the treatment of fat people. They formed the Fat Underground. What NAFA called fat acceptance, they called fat liberation. By 1973, they had released their groundbreaking Fat Manifesto. It demanded equal rights for fat people in all areas of life. It also called out the reducing industries, aka diet culture, and declared them enemies. See, y'all think fat activists today are radical? You should have heard what they were saying back then. The Fat Underground were calling doctors enemies and saying that weight loss was genocide. Which sounds like something a fatphobic person today would say as a satirization of fat acceptance. In that Fat Liberation Manifesto, they list 7 proclamations and grievances. They are not only calling for more humane treatment of fat people, but they are also calling out the diet industry and state that 99% of dieting attempts fail over a 5-year period, which is still, for the most part, true depending on the study. Fat activists were one of the few people calling out the diet industry. Much of our discourse around anti-diet culture today stems from their work.
I really think that if we could break some of the myths associated to being fat.
What myths?
What myths?
Yeah.
It's unhealthy. Being a slob, being dirty, being dumb, being lazy, stupid.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I'm unhappy because I'm ostracized from society. That's the only thing.
The last line of the manifesto reads, "We refuse to be subjugated to the interests of our enemies. We fully intend to reclaim our power over our bodies and our lives. We commit ourselves to pursue these goals together." And they were committed. The movement continued to grow and expanded to other countries throughout the 80s. In 1980 saw the release of Fatso, a movie directed by the famous Anne Bancroft, which centers around a fat man who loves food and endures body policing and health concern trolling from his family members. 1988 gave us John Waters' iconic cult dance film, Hairspray, which still holds up today as one of the few films centering a fat woman who is not only the protagonist, but is also desired by men, is able to dress fashionably, and exudes sexuality. But Hairspray only had moderate success, so it didn't exactly set off a trend in cinema. What was trending, however, was the awareness of EDs, specifically anorexia nervosa. Despite that awareness, though, the rise of the heroin-chic body type took the fashion world by storm. As I discussed at length in my video about I Feel Pretty that I released 2 years ago, supermodels of the time like Kate Moss became known for their waifish figures. This era is often cited by many millennials as the origins of their EDs and body dysmorphia. Since being a size 0 was the ideal, anything over that size was considered too fat. But fat positivity, while still niche, managed to get their points across under the surface. Fat people began creating fat zines. Much of these zines centered around fat positivity and queerness, and there were many that were pornographic and depicted fat people, typically women, as sexual. It was around this time that a woman by the name of Connie Sobchak, I hope that's how you say it, had coined the term body positive. Connie, an ED survivor, lost her sister due to complications from a breast implant surgery. Connie had witnessed her sister, who was fat in childhood, be ridiculed by her family members, especially her father, for her weight, and she saw how this treatment affected her sister's self-esteem and self-image. So in 1996, she and a woman by the name of Elizabeth Scott, an educator and psychotherapist, founded The Body Positive, an organization that still runs today, meant to help people struggling with what they call body dissatisfaction, create a more weight-neutral approach to health, and to help people heal with positive embodiment. While this was started by two thin women, their program and their teachings have always revolved around the concept that there is no such thing as a bad body.
But for the most part, genetically, who we are our weight is determined by who we come from. And so if we focus on weight as the determinant of health, it really doesn't lead to sustainable self-care behaviors.
Their program advocates for health at every size and maintain that our fixation on weight as the sole determinant of health is harmful and unhelpful in the long run. The fundamental beliefs and practices of this organization owe much of their rhetoric and approach to fat activism. The idea that all bodies are good bodies, that our weight is not a direct result of our personal choices, but that of genetics and the failings of diet culture, the health at every size approach. Much of this stems from the work of fat activists who had been screaming into the ether about this shit since the 60s. I say this because while I have a lot of respect for Connie and Elizabeth for creating this organization, and I truly think what they are doing and have been doing for the past 2 decades is incredible and important work, this represents the ways in which the issues faced by extremely marginalized people don't become important to the mainstream until people who don't experience the same type of marginalization decide to platform these issues in a way that is more digestible for people. Which of course brings us back to our old friend Dove. Because not long after this came the Dove campaign for Real Beauty, a campaign dedicated to empowering women to be more confident in their appearances. As mentioned earlier, they began creating ads that featured real women who represented real beauty. But around this time, something else had been emerging. Black fat women and femmes, queer non-binary people, and disabled people began to congregate around a new social movement on the internet. The movement then experienced a resurgence in the late noughties, as an increasing number of Black and non-white plus-size users, bloggers, and activists began to use online social platforms such as Tumblr, LiveJournal, Yahoo, message boards, and Black Planet to create safe online mini-communities for fat women to celebrate and appreciate their bodies without fear of judgment. These communities were accessible via the use of the Fat Acceptance hashtag, which then later graduated to the Body Positivity hashtag, as some fat women were and are still a bit unsure about self-identifying as fat. The movement was in its honeymoon period, and for a minute there, things actually seemed promising. I remember when I first heard body positivity uttered aloud. I was a fat, queer 20-something, surrounded by the loving embrace of friends whose bodies had pushed us to the margins. Trans people, people of color, fat people, queer people. We had formed fast and deep friendships, aided in their speed by our shared need for shelter and comfort in a world that offered us so little. Hearing body positivity was like finding an oasis in the desert. It was a salve for those of us with such deeply maligned bodies. Gabby Gregg, an American plus-size writer and blogger, went viral in 2012 for her Fat Kini blog post in which she posed in several pictures wearing a black and white striped bikini. This led to a swimsuit collection for plus sizes, and from this she launched her own plus-size clothing line with influencer Nicolette Mason called Prem or something. Despite inspiring many women of her size and larger to also don a fat kini and post it proudly for the world to see, she also faced criticism for...
But beyond the fashion rules, as mentioned, you have some people out there who've been critical, saying that you're promoting obesity, that you're promoting an unhealthy lifestyle.
Regardless, many people, especially those whose bodies were on the margins, saw this as a win for body positivity because this began to shine a light on plus-size models, and fashion retailers were finally being pushed to improve their plus-size clothing and expand their size range. Lauren Downing-Peters, an American teacher and researcher who studies what is called stoutwear, aka plus-size clothing, says, quote, "I think 2010 was also the year in which plus-size fashion really became mainstream. Gabourey Sidibe graced the cover of V magazine, and Crystal Wren published her memoir, Hungry. Thus sparked discussions about how the gatekeepers of fashion decide which bodies are in or out. This got me thinking about how women whose bodies do not conform to prevailing beauty ideals and who may or may not identify as plus size struggle with a stigmatized identity with a desire to be fashionable. This same year, Ashley Graham was making headlines for a spicy Lane Bryant commercial that scandalized the public."
To have you with us.
Thank you.
So what do you think right off the bat? If this is a Victoria's Secret model and everybody's a size 2, does this thing air without any controversy?
I mean, has there been any press about that? No. I mean, Victoria's Secret commercials are airing all throughout the day, but when it comes to a Lane Bryant commercial, we have a little bit of extra, overflowing, then, everybody freaks out.
She, along with other models like Iskra Lawrence and Candace Huffane and Tess Holliday, were able to popularize the use of the term. Body positivity began to spread to the mainstream, and people had already started to mold it into something else.
No one should be comfortable at a size 14. Well, I sure the hell am.
Do you see those rolls? Welcome to the bakery, honey. She'd never be a model if it wasn't for her dad. But I got all this from my mama.
How did you get through the door?
You ruined Sports Illustrated. Well, the way I see it, I made it better. Forever.
Around this time came shows like Orange is the New Black, starring Danielle Brooks, one of the few fat black women featured in the cast. And a few years before this, we got Gabourey Sidibe, most known at the time for her role in Precious. Rebel Wilson, at the time a fat actress, garnered fame for her role as Fat Amy in the movie Pitch Perfect. And of course, there was always our girl Melissa McCarthy, who at this time starred in one of the biggest comedies of the 2010s, Bridesmaids. Again, for a minute there, it felt like things were shifting. Ashley Graham and Iskra Lawrence were talking to magazines about body confidence and how girls shouldn't obsess over having a thigh gap, a new body trend that began to circulate the internet in 2010. Ashley Graham was encouraging women to not hide their red stretch marks. This set off its own trend where women all over Instagram felt empowered to proudly show off their stretch marks, some even creating art in an attempt to make stretch marks look beautiful. We were being told left and right that our flaws are what made us beautiful. People like Demi Lovato began doing No Makeup Mondays and ads where she would remove her hair extensions and eyelashes to show her real face, freckles and all. This was the real woman era, where women who were tired of these strict beauty standards and used body positivity as a way to take back that power and reclaim our bodies. Now, from a layperson's perspective, it's easy to interpret this as some kind of fat revolution, but it wasn't really. Going back to the changes happening in plus-size fashion, there were still setbacks despite the hype. See, many of these companies would have plus-size models model their clothes, but didn't actually offer a wide range of plus sizes to its customers. And those who did kept their larger sizes online and not in stores. And while it may seem like body positivity was taking over, Things like hashtag Fitspo and hashtag Fitspiration and a fixation on an hourglass slim thick body type, popularized by people like Kim Kardashian, was also taking the culture by storm. People began lumping Fitspo posts with the body positivity hashtag as if the two were synonymous. While Ashley Graham was platformed and celebrated as a plus-size model, she was not on the fattest end of the spectrum. In fact, she had a pretty slim thick body type from my eyes. Same with Iskra Lawrence. Both gorgeous women, but not necessarily making a huge impact on fat rep. Like with the Dove ads and other femvertisements, they offered only a limited view of what real women looked like. Returning to my I Feel Pretty video, I discussed how during the early 2000s, the bodies of female celebrities were viciously body-shamed, monitored, and derided for being too fat in the tabloids, despite the women themselves not actually being very fat, and oftentimes not fat at all. Throughout the video, I discussed how this bled into a lot of comedies during this time with movies and TV shows like Bridget Jones' Diaries, Girls, and Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Women who fit just slightly outside the slender body ideal were now being propped up as healthy representations of women with normal bodies. And while these women, especially Lena Dunham and Amy Schumer, did receive fat-phobic criticism, their bodies were now considered the bar for fatness, or what we were willing to accept. A size 6 was now the new size 16. Now, is that to say that these women shouldn't be plus-size models? No. Does it mean they're not allowed to want to be good role models for women who are larger? No. Again, that's not the problem. The problem is that it positioned people like Tess Holliday as an exceptionally fat woman. She was considered one of the biggest plus-size models among the others who had also made names for themselves. Despite the radical and size-inclusive origins of the hashtag, many people saw her as a warning sign that maybe body positivity had gone too far. We were all for body positivity, but what we meant was Ashley Graham, not you always wearing a size 22. When we said body positivity, we meant moms who earned their stretch marks and flabby tummies and who weren't apologizing for a body that resulted from multiple pregnancies. When we said body positivity, we meant women who are proportioned, who have all the right junk in all the right places. Speaking of, Meghan Trainor had come onto the scene as a body positive icon after her hit song All About That Bass had become so popular that no one could decide whether it was good, bad, or just plain annoying. After this song launched Meghan into her 15 minutes of fame, she became the face of Full Beauty, a plus-size fashion company that sells some of the ugliest fucking plus-size clothes I've ever seen. And they don't even bother to hire even small fat people to model their clothes, but that's another conversation.
The fat woman in New York has two main stores to buy at, Lane Bryant and Roman's. The clothes are made with no conception of what looks well on a fat woman. Right. The store we must purchase from uses attractive, thin women to model their clothes.
Taryn Brumfitt, a body positive advocate, writer, and filmmaker, made headlines when she posted a reverse before and after photo that went viral and brought with it an avalanche of support and praise. It was 9:18 on a Sunday night in April 2013 when I posted two photos on my Facebook page. One was of me on stage in a bikini at a bodybuilding competition in May 2012, and in the other taken in November. I was sitting naked. I'd put on a few pounds and no longer had my flat tummy, but I loved how I looked in the second shot. I saw a sexy, confident woman. I thought it would be good to share the photos with my friends to make the point that you can feel good about the ways in which your body changes. While Taryn's story is sweet and endearing, and I actually admire her for using this as a way to actually enact change in the world and inspire others, the response to this is a stark contrast to how fat people are treated when they posted unapologetic photos of their fat bodies. Nevertheless, this was seen as revolutionary. A radical movement like body positivity is meant to be, would be, a group of essentially social misfit bodies finding a place to celebrate their existence, assert their right to be there, bond, and find peace. Instead, what we're left with is slim but curvy white women being treated like the Messiah for acknowledging they have one microscopic belly roll. Demi Lovato, who I followed heavily at the time because I was a huge fan, began speaking openly about her struggles with body image, her history with EDs, and learning to embrace her curvaceous figure. During her confident era, she did a no makeup, no Photoshop photo shoot for Vanity Fair in which she told Ellen that she did this because she wanted to be the difference. and people saw her that way and celebrated her bravery and confidence. But something that Ellen says during this interview became the added caveat for many who claim to advocate for body positivity.
But the most important thing, that the message that we should be sending young girls and young boys, is be healthy. It doesn't matter really what your weight is, just be healthy. That's the most important thing.
This is why women who were visibly fat and didn't need to display their stomachs in a picture to reveal their hidden belly roll were constantly called to answer for whether they were glorifying obesity. Health was used as a trump card. Yes, it was good to be positive, but the most important thing is health. And while if you didn't look healthy, you were not allowed in the body positivity club. These women had failed in their duty to be a size 0 or 2. Instead, they dared to be a size 6, 8, 10. They had fallen from the high wire of beauty standards, caught by a safety net of body positivity, and their relative proximity to the beauty expected of them. They were perfectly feminine, excruciatingly heterosexual. They were impossibly beautiful and less than a third my size. This, I was told, was courage. This was admirable. This was body positivity.
No, but is it against the law, though?
The fasten seatbelt sign is on.
But is it against the law, though?
Seatbelt sign.
But is it against the law?
Seatbelt sign is on.
But is it against the law?
Seatbelt sign.
But is it against the law?
It's on. Seatbelt sign is on. Seatbelt sign is on. Seatbelt sign is on.
So, let's talk about healthism, shall we? Healthism was a term coined by Robert Crawford in 1980 in the International Journal of Health Services. Although disease is complex and multifaceted with many different intersecting influences, healthism views health through the lens of personal responsibility and control. Healthism blames the individual's health on their behavior and choices and shames the individual for not being able to do all the right things when their efforts fail, which they inevitably do. The individual then is viewed as a failure and morally inferior. Healthism is itself intertwined with many isms, such as racism, ableism, classism, and anti-fat bias. Healthism doesn't just harm people living in larger bodies. It is used to maintain ableism, racism, transphobia, classism, and more. For example, healthist beliefs that health is solely in an individual's control can work to stigmatize people struggling with a substance use disorder or addiction, focusing on the person's actions and ignoring factors about their genetics and environment. I would say most, if not all of us, are guilty of participating in healthism, whether it be making diabetes jokes anytime you eat something sweet or referring to certain foods as good or bad. We all play into healthist myths and beliefs whether we're aware of it or not. Food shame being one of the most common and normalized facets of healthism. For example, fast food. Fast food is seen by many as a low form of food consumption, due to the fact that you don't have to get out of your car and the fact that it's prepared and served at a very fast pace. It's seen as food for the lazy and the lower class. And since gluttony is regarded as one of the 7 deadly sins in the Bible, that religious belief contributes to our negative attitudes around indulgence and fatness. Meanwhile, people who engage in deprivation, such as by dieting, fasting, detoxing, or doing juice cleanses, are often viewed as good and moral. People being able to fight off their hunger cues is seen as a sign of strength and willpower. Willpowder.
What you need is willpowder.
As thoroughly detailed in her amazing book, Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia, Dr. Sabrina Strings details where these cultural beliefs around fatness and health stem from. Fatness in some ways has always been linked to laziness and a lack of intelligence, which has also always been linked to blackness by racists of the past. During the Age of Enlightenment, Jean-Baptiste Pierre Le Romain, a French engineer who contributed work to the encyclopedia, had this to say about Africans in the colonies. Their penchant for pleasure makes them unfairly unfit for hard labor, since they are generally lazy, cowardly, and very fond of gluttony. They are lazy, drunken, gluttonous, and apt to steal. Dr. Strings cites the encyclopedia as one of the earliest prominent publications to make the claim that blacks were fond of gluttony. She continues, but it was not the first ever to do so, nor would it be the last. Reports have been making their way to Europe from the colonies describing the ritual practice of overfeeding in Africa for over a century. In the 1580s, for instance, the Italian botanist Prospero Alpini pronounced himself awestruck by what he called the art of fattening in Egypt. Julian Joseph Viry, a French anthropologist and naturalist, took an interest in the physical traits of Africans and described Negroes as of a mild disposition, robust but slow, and very lazy. American culture has always demonized laziness. We embrace the belief that people should pick themselves up by their bootstraps. We uplift hard work and tenacity as virtuous human traits. Those who work hard will be rewarded. Those who don't deserve to suffer the consequences of their unhealthy behaviors, and they do not deserve happiness. This is why Jessamine Stanley's Cosmo article is bittersweet. On the one hand, she is a positive influence in the sense that she wants people of all sizes to feel included in fitness spaces. On the other hand, it's an article insistent on proving that fat can be healthy. While it is true that many fat people work out and don't all consume fast food on a regular basis, as many assume, this focus on showing fat people being active and eating right stems from a deeply healthist and ableist mindset. It suggests that the reason we shouldn't be mean to fat people is because, look, not all of them sit around crying while pouring a jar of M&Ms into their mouths. This is where we get the concept of the good fatty versus the bad fatty. You are a bad fat person if you are not trying not to be fat, and you're a good fat person if you are publicly detailing your grueling journey towards weight loss. And side note, but this is also why fat people who get weight loss surgery aren't always embraced by thin people or thin people who used to be fat for their weight loss, because some people perceive that as taking the easy way out. They didn't work for their weight loss, therefore they did not earn a thin body. Since goodness is attached to health, which is attached to thinness, it is no wonder then that the emphasis on health, exercise, and self-improvement took over a movement that wasn't originally about any of the above. From the girl boss feminist politics that were permeating the air during the 2010s, from femvertisements encouraging us to be strong and to shine, from the commercialization of body positivity and the insidious normalization of healthism, this all helped to push out the fat, black, queer, and disabled people from a movement they helped promulgate. People were worried that physical health had been replaced by this new obsession with positivity, and so people who promoted body positivity, especially people who were on the fatter end of the spectrum, were seen as glorifying and encouraging unhealthy behaviors. This fear is only further intensified when we see people like Tess and Lizzo, who weren't just famous because they were fat, but because they were hot, and as Queen Latifah sings in Hairspray, were not afraid to throw their weight around. Even though Lizzo began regularly posting about converting to veganism and there was a ton of video evidence proving that she was very athletic and had lots of stamina, this was not enough for detractors. She didn't look healthy, aka thin, and that's all that mattered. So positivity and confidence was out of the question. Now fat people who had hardly made a breakthrough into the mainstream were now being told that body positivity was not for them. It was for the Taryn Brumfits and Ashley Grahams of the world. This is why that comment from that Redditor who complained that larger fat women were disproportionately represented in Fat Rep is baffling and untrue. Fat Rep is very few and far between, firstly, and if anything, it's overwhelmingly represented by fat white people. From Ricky Lake to Chrissy Metz to Tess Holliday to Rebel Wilson to Adele to Melissa McCarthy to Nikki Blonsky. On the male side, there's Seth Rogen, Jonah Hill, Kevin James, James Corden, Jack Black, Haley Joel Osment, Jesse Plemons, etc. But out of all the women, dismissing race for a second, Chrissy Metz is the fattest that I've seen. I remember the first time I saw This Is Us and being completely blown away by seeing a very fat person on screen. One of her most memorable scenes is that of her getting naked and stepping on a scale before tripping backward and spraining her ankle, which... Great, guys. I had never seen someone of her size on screen, especially someone of her size being one of the main characters with the whole plot, love interest, backstory, the whole shebang. And while I have many issues with this show and the way they wrote her character, that was still nice to see and a step in the right direction. Kind of. But just because we have a Melissa McCarthy or a Chrissy Metz does not mean they are taking space from small fat people. We only have one Melissa McCarthy. We had one Adele. We had one Nikki Blonsky, who basically didn't have a career after that movie despite her iconic and memorable performance and beautiful voice. As for fat black women, we're in an even smaller pool of Fat Rep because while we had Monique, Queen Latifah, Countess Vaughn, Natalie Desselle, R.I.P., and now comedians like Retta and Nicole Byer, fat black women are almost entirely left out of the equation. You weren't seeing too many mid-fat black women on the cover of Cosmo, were you? Why do you think we all got attached to Lizzo? My point here is, small fat white people have always been the bar for Fat Rep. The most recent example is Kat from Euphoria. I think the real problem that is actually grinding this Redditor's gears is that there just isn't a wide variety of body diversity in Hollywood, period. I discussed earlier how actors are often required to maintain a certain body type for red carpet events, for photo shoots, and for films and TV shows. As a result, we get thin 90% of the time. And this becomes the default body type for a majority of characters, unless the project wants to have a fat character. And then that fat character is now offered up as the fat representation. They are treated as though they are the fattest person in that movie or TV show's universe because there's only room for one fat person. This translates to the real world. As a small fat to mid-sized person myself, I am not in the business of perpetuating this falsity that people who are fatter than me somehow get all the shine when that's not true. It's weird to see a fat person like Tess and be so angry at her because women who aren't average never get the spotlight. To take that out on her is just so strange and clearly stems from a place of unchecked privilege and internalized fat phobia. People sometimes don't want to acknowledge that even if you have a body that you hate and that other people may ridicule, it doesn't mean you don't possess some privilege. So returning to my video on I Feel Pretty, some people criticized my take and said that Amy Schumer and Rachel Bloom were fat, and as for Amy, had experienced fat shaming due to her size despite not being very fat, even though I never discounted that. But I'm not interested in debating about people's body size because that's weird. But based on their stated clothing size at the time, they were not plus size, and they both have spoken to this themselves. Amy Schumer complained in 2017 after being featured in a plus size issue for Glamour that girls thinking she's plus size is ridiculous because she went between a size 6 and an 8. In 2019, Rachel Bloom, star and creator of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, went on Nicole Byers' podcast and opened up about her body dysmorphia that she didn't realize she had while shooting the first season of the show. After hearing this, it perfectly explains, at least to me, the fat coding of her character that I was critiquing in that video.
That's funny to look at pictures truly from not that long ago and you're like, I looked so young and I'm getting so much older.
Oh, it was, I mean, I see pictures from the pilot because I had in my head, you know, when you move out here, like New York, I didn't think about my body much. I just feel like, I don't know,
I also never thought about my body in New York.
You just don't think about it. You don't really talk about it. And maybe that's a luxury of being with the same guy. And also I was skinnier, especially in college. And then I moved out here and I started going to commercial auditions and I instantly felt super fucking out of shape. And so I had it in my head when I was getting married and we were making the pilot, like, oh, I'm so normal. I'm going to show people what a real body looks like or whatever. And I look at pictures of myself in the pilot. I'm like, I was so skinny. That body dysmorphia is crazy. I was a size 4.
Yeah,
what?
That's tiny.
Why would I ever think that that's anything but like in good shape? Because now I'm like
LA
an 8.
will fucking do that to you.
Yeah.
When I said that it was absurd for I Feel Pretty to imply that Amy Schumer was plus size, I think some people felt that I was trying to take something away from her, like her identity or something. Obviously, anti-fat bias affects everyone, regardless of size. So of course, I am not dismissing the fact that she has experienced fat shaming. But as I explained in that video, she participated in it. It was a part of her stand-up and inside Amy Schumer. She constantly overstated the size of her body and made relentless fat jokes about herself at her own expense. But when she was actually considered fat by Glamour magazine, she was like, hold up. Here's the thing. Most of us have experienced some form of body shaming and body policing. As I said earlier, skinny shaming is a thing and is bad. But just because someone experiences this doesn't exactly equate to experiencing systemic marginalization. Yes, Amy was not very thin in I Feel Pretty, but she was still straight-sized and, as pointed out by some of you, had abs. I understand that we live in a thin-obsessed society, so it's easy to forget that while we have always glorified thinness, we have also always glorified thickness. People think that at one point we all used to love fat people and hated thin people, and then the turns tabled. But that's not exactly how it went down. Based on Dr. String's research, it seems during the Renaissance, bodies that were fleshier and fuller were exalted, but it was more about the shape more than anything else. Proportionate and well-rounded physiques were revered, as they were believed to reveal something of the beauty and mystery of divinity. A woman might find herself being considered too thin or too fat, given the prevailing preference for proportionate, often implying medium physiques. But if a lady had to err on the side of the scale, a fat woman was generally preferred to one who might be derisively labeled lean or bony. Male artists during that period were literally creating beauty standards based on what they felt depicted a perfect human body. One such male artist by the name of Aubrey Gordon, who in 1521 sketched a black woman by the name of Katharina. This sketch became the first known sketch of a black woman in Antwerp. But Durer felt the beauty of Negroes relied mostly on their shapely and well-formed bodies, not their faces. Pierre Bourdieu, a French sociologist, calls this a judgment of taste, an aesthetic value system crafted by elites that places qualities symbolizing refinement atop the aesthetic hierarchy. Within the aesthetic system of the High Renaissance, pointed noses and fine lips were typically associated with a refined facial beauty. At the same time, well-formed proportionate figures represented the height of bodily beauty. Around the 1520s, Durer began studying the human form and wanted to illustrate what he felt was a normal body for men and women. He put his findings in a book titled 4 Books on Human Proportion. The bodies for women were round, curvy, and thick. It is unclear from the manuscripts why there was a preponderance of fleshy, rounded women among the artist's sketches. Surviving reports suggest that Dürer worked with 200 to 300 live models in the formulation of his canon of proportions. Therefore, it could have been simply that more voluptuous women had made themselves available as models. Other artists like Raphael and Giuliano de' Medici continued this trend in their own works. Thickness began to be seen as healthy, where on the flip side, thinness was a signal of poor health and hygiene. But it was Peter Paul Rubens who had turned the bodies of full-figured women into Venuses. It was his last name that the term Rubenesque originated from.
And so I thought, okay, we know that during the Renaissance that voluptuous women were prized. But we also know from my own research, I knew at least, that by the 19th century, slender women were prized. And so there was something that took place between the Renaissance and the 19th century. And so that was the historical narrative that I was attempting to trace. So it just so happens that as I was reading a lot of books about aesthetics during the Renaissance, and they were talking about different types of beauty, they were also, especially toward the tail end, talking about Black women. That was also amazing to me at the time, because I wouldn't have suspected that Black women would have been on their minds. But of course, this is the beginning of the slave trade. And so for the first time, a lot of philosophers or artists who were revered had the opportunity to access not just European models, but also African models. And because of the novelty, there was a lot that was being written about Black women's bodies. And for the most part, they were suggesting physically, Black women are just as voluptuous and attractive as are European women. But of course, we know that over time, that narrative changed.
But going back to African bodies being seen as the ideal due to their proportions, this in the encyclopedia gave rise to race science, which brings us to the story of Sarah Baartman, a Khoikhoi woman who was thrust into infamy for her large butt and elongated labia. During the 1770s, she was taken to London, where she was essentially used as a human spectacle for the white and wealthy elite, to literally poke and prod at her exotic body for a fee. Sarah was seen as both grotesque and exotic, a hypersexualized specimen with a peculiar racial identity. Many people refer to the Sarah Baartman story as the origin story for our obsession with big booties, but her story, along with the African slave trade, marked the beginnings for white people wanting to uphold bodily distinctions between themselves and Black people. That's why when the slim and slender body ideal became the ideal during the 19th and 20th century, having a big butt was seen as fat and undesirable until, of course, the 2000s, when people like Kim Kardashian made having curves and a big butt appealing to white women. Now having a big booty was in fashion, since it was no longer associated with Black women. The rise of the slim, thick body type and the ubiquity of body positivity led many to believe that we had finally moved past the obsession with thinness. That's why a couple of years ago, there were so many YouTube videos and hot takes claiming that skinny was coming back. But skinny never left, and the healthist made sure of that. But I say all this to say that while being in a small, fat body can feel alienating in a world obsessed with thinness, there is a lot of privilege in having a small, fat body. Yes, plus sizes in stores can be a fraught area, but as a small fat, I have never had trouble finding my size in clothing stores. Someone 3 times my size might not have that same experience. Returning to those Reddit comments who said they would prefer an Ashley Graham over a Tess Holliday, they prefer an Ashley Graham because she has a shape that we have always in some ways found appealing and attractive. She had all the right junk in all the right places, and Tess had too much junk in all the wrong places. I have friends who are fat and are insecure of their bodies because they aren't pretty fat, which is really sad. This new mid-size movement, along with body positivity being co-opted by thin people, only helped to create more narrow beauty standards, which didn't include those who weren't pretty fat or, again, healthy. But before we end this video, I'd like to return to Louise Thompson. Louise Thompson, as mentioned earlier, was a British reality TV star who became known on Instagram for her fit body and slim figure. In 2024, however, she revealed that giving birth to her now 2-year-old son almost took her life. Twice. In this article, she explains in excruciating detail her horrific experience with pregnancy and birth. She was in and out of intensive care, had to get an emergency C-section, almost died on the operating table twice. She suffered hemorrhaging, postpartum depression, she got diagnosed with lupus, and due to having ulcerative colitis, her colon had to be removed and she now has to wear a stoma bag. Truly horrible stuff. And brace yourself if you plan on reading this article, it's rough.
I now see it as a carcass that just holds loads of organs and keeps me alive. And that's a huge evolution, because for a while, you know, I guess I was seen as someone that did have, not the dream body, I mean, that would be really arrogant to say that, but I have been the cover of Women's Health, thank you guys, twice, and that was a huge honour and a really pivotal moment for my career, so I was so grateful to do that, and I would work out 5 days a week. I suppose I was known for having abs. I had great abdominal muscles, and I loved strength training, and all of that has changed. I've kind of reached this new chapter, and I think that actually how you see your body changes a lot anyway after you have kids, and I'm 34. My priorities have changed, so I have a family, and I don't necessarily kind of flaunt my body in the same way that I used to. I don't spend a lot of time in bikinis or bodycon dresses, and yeah, this is the new me, and I feel confident.
I'm ending with this story because I think some of us who are able-bodied, who are in presumably good health, don't think about how drastically our lives can change over time. We are not promised good health or an able body. You are also not promised a eventually desirable body. Sometimes life happens, or malpractice happens if you read this article, which can lead to you maybe losing something that you were once very accustomed to having. We don't like to think about that because it scares us. We know how the disabled are treated in our country. We know how fat people are treated. We know how people who have chronic illnesses are treated. And those of us who aren't fat or disabled and don't have chronic illnesses fear being ostracized in that way. Our society is built on this premise of survival of the fittest. Rather than embracing difference and letting those who fit outside strict beauty and health standards have a space where they can feel seen and heard, we reject them and push them away. I imagine Louise's story resonated with a lot of people who have also had traumatic birth experiences. After she posted a picture of herself in a bathing suit with her stomach bag, it inspired one of her followers who also had a stomach bag to go out and buy a bathing suit as well. I think that's awesome because people deserve that. Regardless of health, people deserve to be seen and represented. People who are healthy should not be our only role models. Not everyone has the luxury of being physically healthy or even mentally healthy. I myself struggle with horrible depression and suicidal ideation. The idea that I'm not allowed to exist happily in the world due to my mental illness is not something any of us should be endorsing. This is why I don't really focus much on whether being fat is healthy or unhealthy, because it doesn't matter. Or at least it shouldn't matter when it comes to how we treat each other.
Even if it was 100% true, every single fat person is unhealthy. Fine. Everyone, regardless of their health status, gets to post a photo on Instagram and be like, I felt cute.
Yeah.
Everyone gets to do that without people being ghouls in their mentions.
Our failure to recognize this, along with the fake empowerment messages about body positivity, is what ultimately killed this radical movement. Body positivity didn't make the impact that it should have because we simply didn't want it to. When people hear fat acceptance and body positivity, I think it causes a visceral response from people, because something I've come to notice about people is that a lot of us hate joy and naked positivity. I haven't fully unpacked why this is, but there is something about the way people reacted to the Tess Holiday cover. It's almost like people were mad that someone who looked like her could come to love a body that they themselves fear having, and if they already have it, haven't reached the place that she's in. This is extremely apparent in that first Piers Morgan segment that we discussed. The woman on the panel who called fat people liars said that she used to be really fat and didn't like her body and therefore felt Tess didn't have a right to be proud of her body. How dare she be proud of something that I worked so hard to get away from? Many of us have very complicated relationships with our bodies. Many people spend their entire lives with an enormous sense of dissatisfaction with how they look. So I think when they hear acceptance and positivity, they cringe. Because acceptance to many sounds like a slap in the face. It sounds like defeat, like we've given up. I don't want to accept my body. I hate my fucking body. And listen, I get it. I don't always love my body either. But your personal hangups should not interfere with someone else wanting to accept themselves as they are, or that person being accepted by others. Someone not meeting your health standards shouldn't mean that a fat black woman shouldn't be a pop star. And it shouldn't mean that fat people shouldn't be allowed to be role models. It's hard to have a body, especially in a world that so deeply reviles fatness, rejecting it wherever it appears. All of us deserve to find peace in our skin, but we cannot claim to be body positive and then promptly begin to gatekeep who can and cannot be part of the movements and frameworks that have brought so much healing to so many. Sometimes we don't always clock how much we project our own fears, insecurities, and biases on people who are simply tired of hating their bodies or being alienated and don't want to hide anymore. The death of body positivity makes me sad, because like with the femvertisements, it has led to this false belief that we somehow are past fat acceptance, when in reality, we were never ready to accept fat people in the first place.